Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents Risk Management Concepts and Guidance, 5th edition, by Carl L. Pritchard, Pmp Pmi-Rmp Evp, narrated by Adam Lofbomm. Preface. Welcome to the future. What we thought might be here tomorrow is now a reality. The challenge for most of us is trying to predict what's coming tomorrow and how we'll deal with it. Risk, as a future phenomenon, is the focus of many business and personal discussions and is perennially part of our decision-making. The challenges come when I'm creating a degree of consistency in risk management and risk process. It is part of the eternal quest to control some small component of the future. The latest steps in that quest are reflected in two significant project management documents: a Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK Guide, 5th edition, and the Project Management Guidance of ISO 21500. These latest guides take into account fresh concepts in risk management, including risk attitudes, risk appetites, and futures thinking. They also remain firmly rooted in risk management tradition, dating back half a century. The first edition of this book was in part edited from the publication of the same title by the Defense Systems Management College. Over time, as project risk philosophy has evolved away somewhat from U.S. Department of Defense (DoD) practice, this book has evolved as well. With the perspectives of the latest project management guidance, the effort here is to keep the focus of this book on the pragmatic orientation of its predecessors, with an emphasis on the need to deploy tools consistently and affirm a common risk language. There is an opportunity for organizations to use this text to draw out their tools of choice and evolve a risk culture that mirrors their organizational and individual needs. Project management and risk management go hand in hand to ensure that organizations can build in more consistent outcomes, more consistent approaches, and more effective responses to the vagaries of life in an uncertain world. As I teach risk management around the globe, I listen time and again as organizations affirm that their environment is special. They're right. Each organizational environment is a culture unto itself. As risk managers, our challenge and our objective is to minimize, to the degree practicable, the uncertainty that such unique environments create. This book is structured as a reference guide to serve that objective. My hope is that it will also serve the objective of providing support for those studying for the Pmi-Rmp Risk Management Professional Certification Exam. The book has been modified in this latest edition to ensure the language of the text mirrors the language of that exam. In keeping with risk management's DoD roots, I have retained the format of the tables and the matrices that allow for quick analysis and cross-reference of the contents herein. References to specific analyses still hark back to the 380 surveys initially done for this work, but the original caveat holds true. The risk techniques resulting from this effort have not been evaluated for all circumstances. Therefore, you must determine the validity and appropriateness of a particular technique for your own organization and applications. My sincere thanks go out to those who have provided invaluable risk insight over the past few years. Most recently, working with Karen Tate, Bruce Falk, Leroy Ward, Lisa Hammer, David Newman, John Koss, Eric Perlstein, and Fran Martin. I have explored risk avenues that might otherwise have gone uncultivated. I also want to extend my thanks to the team at my new publisher, Taylor and Francis, for their unwavering support of the book, and for shepherding it, and me, through their publication process. Without the guidance of John Weiselek, Kat Everett, and Amy Blaylock, this 5th edition would never have become reality. My thanks also go to Elise Weinger-Halprin, graphic designer, for the cover art that gives the book a distinctive flavor all its own. Author. Carl L. Pritchard is the principal of Pritchard Management Associates and is a widely recognized risk management authority and lecturer. He was the lead chapter author for the risk management chapter of A Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK Guide, 4th edition. Mr. Pritchard's publications include courses in risk management, the Risk Management Memory Jogger, Goal QPC 2012, as well as Project Management, Lessons from the Field, iUniverse 2009, the Project Management Communications Toolkit, 2nd edition, Artec House 2012, How to Build a Work Breakdown Structure, and Precedence Diagramming, Successful Scheduling in the Team Environment. He co-produced, with ESI's Leroy Ward, the landmark 9-CD audio collection, The Portable PMP Exam Prep, Conversations on Passing the PMP Exam, 4th edition. He is the U.S. correspondent for Project Manager Today, a project management journal published in the United Kingdom. Mr. Pritchard also designs and develops project management programs and was the original architect of ESI International's landmark offerings in project management in a distance learning format. He is a trainer both online and in the classroom. In his role as lecturer, Mr. Pritchard speaks regularly at national symposia on project management and serves as the speaker's coach for several national conferences, providing guidance on how most effectively to share the project management gospel. He is active in professional project management associations and is a certified project management professional, PMP, a certified risk management professional, Pmi-Rmp, and an earned value professional, EVP, as certified by the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, AACE International. Mr. Pritchard earned a BA degree in journalism from The Ohio State University. Mr. Pritchard lives with his wife and best friend Nancy in Frederick, Maryland, and has 2 sons, Adam and James. He can be reached via email at carl@carlpritchard.com. Introduction. This latest edition of Risk Management, Concepts and Guidance is designed to provide a look at risk in light of the current information, and yet remains grounded in the history of risk practice. As a reference volume, it provides a fundamental introduction on the basics associated with particular techniques. As an educational tool, it clarifies the concepts of risk and how they apply in projects. For those immersed in project management culture, it is now compliant with the Project Management Institute Incorporated publication, A Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK Guide, 4th edition. When originally published, this material was geared toward the government environment. In the first edition, the effort was to reorient and edit the governmental material toward a more general business audience. In the second edition, the content was redesigned to align with day-to-day project management practice and the application of risk management in the field, coupled with the latest cutting-edge risk practices. In the second and third editions, this book aligned with the PMBOK guides of the respective times, PMBOK Guide 2000 and PMBOK Guide 3rd edition. In this latest edition, very few of the tools have been altered, but the processes have indeed changed. In their 4th and 5th editions of the PMBOK Guide, the Project Management Institute redefined some of the risk management process terms and slightly modified their practice and interpretation. This volume reflects those changes. Scope. Risk management is a method of managing that concentrates on identifying and controlling the areas or events that have a potential of causing unwanted change. It is no more and no less than informed management. Carver, 1985. In keeping with this definition, this book addresses project risk management from the project manager's perspective. It does not cover insurance risk, safety risk, or accident risk outside the project context. Risk management does, however, adopt PMI's perspective that risk is both threat and opportunity, and it acknowledges that any effective risk management practice must look at the potential positive events that may befall a project, as well as the negatives. Risk management remains an integral part of project management and should be considered a component of any project management methodology rather than an independent function distinct from other project management functions. Approach. Risk management uses a holistic approach to risk. That is, risk is examined as a blend of environmental, programmatic, and situational concerns. Although technical issues are a primary source of risk and figure prominently throughout the book, they must be balanced with managing other aspects of the project. Throughout the text, risk is considered exclusively as a future phenomenon. Risks are events that may happen to a project. They are not events that have already occurred. It is vital to consider risk in that context, because otherwise, every negative issue or change in plans may potentially be mislabeled as a risk event. Using this book. When using risk management, remember that risk is a complex concept subject to individual perception. Some people take risks, whereas others are more risk-averse. Hence, it is difficult to develop universal rules for dealing with risk. Nevertheless, this book includes substantial guidance, structure, and sample handling techniques that follows sound management practice. Although the principles, practices, and theories presented hold true in nearly all situations, yet under certain circumstances, the rules by which risk is evaluated may change drastically. For example, when confronted by an extreme threat, people can do extraordinary things. They will take risks that under ordinary circumstances would be deemed unacceptable. As a result, high-risk projects are not always bad and should not necessarily be avoided. Rather, if risks are accepted, they should be rigorously monitored and controlled, and others should be made aware that those significant risks exist. Risk management is structured in a tutorial fashion and is presented in two parts. Part 1 begins in Chapter 1 by analyzing the systems that can be used to apply risk management. The next chapter defines risk in terms relevant to project management and establishes the basic concepts necessary to understand the nature of risk. Chapter 3 defines the risk management structure and processes that can be applied to all project phases, with an emphasis on risk management planning. Part 2 presents specific techniques necessary to successfully implement the processes described in Part 1. Using these techniques, the project manager can gain some of the insights essential to proceed with risk management. The techniques evaluated include expert interviews, planning meetings, risk practice methodology, documentation reviews, analogy comparisons, plan evaluation, Delphi technique, brainstorming, Crawford slip method, CSM, SWOT analysis, checklists, risk breakdown structure, root cause identification and analysis, risk registers and/or tables, project templates, assumptions analysis, decision analysis, expected monetary value, estimating relationships, network analysis, excluding PERT, program evaluation and review technique, PERT, other diagramming techniques, rating schemes, urgency assessment, data quality assessment, risk modeling, sensitivity analysis, Monte Carlo simulations, including merge bias and path convergence, risk factors, risk response matrix, performance tracking and technical performance measurement, risk reviews and audits, other common techniques. As you work through all this material, remember that risk is a highly personal and unique experience. No two projects will share exactly the same risks. No two project managers will seize the same set of opportunities. As such, the ultimate authority on risk is not any tool or technique addressed between these covers. Rather, the ultimate authority on your project's risk is the project manager. You. Part 1. Risk processes and practices. Why risk management? The first part of risk management, concepts and guidance, reviews the basic processes and practices associated with risk management in the project environment. It does so in depth, assessing the rules of the road in planning for, identifying, assessing, developing responses to, and controlling risk. It is a conceptual overview of how risk should be addressed. By institutionalizing risk management in an organization, there is inevitably a dread of analysis paralysis, the fear that so much time will be spent examining concerns and potential problems that none of them is ever resolved. There is also anxiety with regard to administrative overburden. Project managers are frequently among the busiest people in an organization. They are apprehensive that they will have to do even more, and risk management is just one more administrative function they don't have time for. As a result, risk sometimes becomes a secondary issue. In organizations where success is the norm and failure is a rarity, risk management is relegated to obscurity in the hope that project managers will be able to handle project issues and problems as they occur. Nevertheless, these organizations should embrace risk management. Risk remains a secondary issue only as long as an organization's luck holds out, or until a grand opportunity is missed. Sooner or later, bad things happen to good projects, and a project manager without a clear strategy will eventually pay a price, regardless of whether calculated in terms of lost resources, a blown schedule, or a budget overrun. The repercussions of such failure fall directly on the project manager. Needless to say, there is also a stigma associated with risk management. It is perceived as the dark side of a project. and the project manager becomes the prophet of doom and gloom. When applied inconsistently, risk management makes good risk managers appear to be pessimists and naysayers, whereas those who take no proactive posture on risk are regarded as team players. Therefore, the only time a project manager can really succeed as a risk manager, both individually and organizationally, is when that manager has the support of the organization and its practices. That is why a clear, well-developed set of risk practices and protocols is vital to the long-term survival of any project organization. 1. Risk management practices. Even the simplest business decision involves some risk. Since every project involves some measure of risk, it is the project's success criteria that often serve as the determining factors for which risks are worth taking and which risks are not. Consider, for example, the decision to drive or fly on a business trip. If cost is the success criterion, then risk determination is simple. Compare the costs of flying and driving, compounded by potential inflationary factors. However, another success criterion might be safety, and thus statistics concerning accidents should be evaluated. If punctual arrival is added as a third criterion, then airline on-time statistics, automobile dependability, and road conditions should be evaluated. As other success criteria are added, decision-making becomes more complicated and involves more judgment. In the business trip example, increased cost is perhaps an acceptable risk. Being late may be unacceptable, and not arriving safely is certainly unacceptable. If project managers do not know what success criteria are driving the project, then they cannot hope to identify the risks that may impede their road to success. Increasing technical complexity, in turn, increases risk. Every new generation of technology is layered on the old. Nevertheless, most organizations tend to weight decisions heavily toward cost and schedule goals because they are easy to understand. But the effective cost and schedule decisions related to technical performance risk frequently is unclear. Thus, a formal methodology for evaluating the effects of decision-making and foreseeable problems is indispensable and should also help to identify practical and effective workarounds for achieving project goals. A systematic process. Not all projects require a formal risk management approach, but to get the maximum benefit, risk management must become a systematic process applied in a disciplined manner. Put more simply, not every project has to follow every step, but implementing the basic practices should be rote. Many project managers use intuitive reasoning, guessing, as the starting point in the decision-making process. That's not a bad place to start. However, truly effective managers will look beyond simple reasoning and experience in making decisions that involve significant risk. Even the most experienced project managers have not encountered every risk. There are some risks that they cannot imagine or do not match their paradigm, and there are still others that they just cannot predict. Some risks are so far outside any individual's expectations or experience that those risks cannot possibly be considered without any external inputs. Numerous inhibitions restrain implementing risk management as a standard project practice. It's unpopular. It points out the negative. It primarily focuses on potentially bad news. The Project Management Institute Incorporated, PMI, has established a 6-step set of processes and practices. The PMI approach to risk comprises Plan risk management. In this area, we establish project risk infrastructure and a project-specific risk management plan. This includes creating risk language, tolerances, and thresholds. Identify risks. We describe events that will have potentially negative or positive impacts on projects, with descriptions that include the event that may happen and its specific impact. Qualify risks. We evaluate risk according to non-numeric assessment protocols. Quantify risks. We evaluate the most significant risks and/or the project as a whole according to their numeric probability and impact. Plan risk responses. We determine, evaluate, and communicate strategies to deal with or preclude risks. Monitor and control risks. We put risk management and response plans into action. The 6-step process is not in lockstep with every other process in every other organization, but for the most part, the differences are semantic in nature. In earlier editions of PMI's A Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK Guide, 2nd edition, risk management was a 4-step process. The U.S. military's Defense Acquisition University applies a 6-step process that includes planning, identification, analysis, handling, monitoring, and implementation. The Australian government's Department of Commerce applies a 6-step process, involves establishing context, identifying and defining risks, conducting analysis, conducting evaluations, developing and implementing treatments, and monitoring, reporting, updating, and managing risks. Regardless of the labels applied, all the processes designed seem to encourage more flexible, adaptive approaches within an organization's project methodology and to facilitate risk management implementation. All project managers should perform some documented risk management activity, either qualitative or quantitative. All significant projects should include formal, intense risk management activities. Smaller, less critical projects may require only a scaled-down risk effort. Thus, the ultimate authority on risk is the project manager, who must make determinations based on the project's cost, schedule, and performance challenges. Summary: risk management is essential for every project. Risk management should be a systematic process. All projects should have some documented risk management activity. 2. Risk concepts. Although the terms risk and uncertainty are often used interchangeably, they are not the same. Risk is defined as the cumulative effect of the probability of uncertain occurrences that may positively or negatively affect project objectives. Ward, 2008, 353. This is unlike uncertainty, which considers only the event and where the probability is completely unknown. The traditional view says that risk is a situation where an event may happen, and the frequency of occurrence can be evaluated based on a probability distribution of past occurrences or environmental considerations. Although that observation has limited utility in project management, it does distinguish between risk and uncertainty. With risk, there is a sense of the relative level of event probability. With uncertainty, however, that probability is completely unknown. To understand whether an event is truly risky, the project manager must understand the potential effects resulting from its occurrence or non-occurrence. Determining risk in this manner requires judgment. For example, although an event may have a low likelihood of occurring, the consequences, if it does occur, can be catastrophic. A commercial airline flight illustrates this type of situation. Although the probability of a crash is low, the consequences are generally grave. Although many people feel uncomfortable about flying because of the consequences of failure, most people do not consider flying a high risk. This example also emphasizes the principle that risk greatly depends on individual perception. The nature of any given risk is composed of 3 fundamental elements: the event, the probability, and the severity, or impact. The event is the description of the risk as it may occur. Event descriptions are crucial. The probability and impact of a plane crash at the gate are far different from the probability and impact of a plane crash from an altitude of 30,000 feet. Thus, risk managers must explore the nature of the risk event itself before they can begin to examine risk probability and impact. Without a clear definition of the risk event, ascertaining probability and impact become far more difficult. As a rule, risk events should be described in full sentences. A template for such a sentence can be as simple as, event may happen to the project, causing impact to the project objectives. Such a consistent approach to the risk definition affords a much easier journey through the remainder of the risk process. After the risk has been defined, we must establish the potential severity of its impact. How badly could it hurt the objective? Only when we have a sense of the degree of impact under consideration can probability be assessed. Statistical data and probability theory play important roles in determining this variable. However, because projects in the traditional project environment are unique, it is sometimes difficult to ascertain whether an applicable historical record for comparison exists. In most organizations and for most projects, there is little disagreement about the level of risk if the variables are classified as follows. Low probability and low impact equal low risk. High probability and high impact equal high risk. High probability and low impact equal low risk. to the project's overall success. However, as you move toward the low probability, high impact quadrant of the figure, determining the risk level becomes more subjective and requires guidelines. A project with many moderate risk items may be considered high risk, whereas a project with a few high-risk items may have a lower overall risk rating. These situations usually require some type of modeling to ascertain the project risk level. Consequently, many attempts have been made to model this subjective evaluation of risk mathematically. Some statisticians and project managers may apply probability distributions, whereas others may not. As stakeholders rate risks, disagreements can occur. Although project managers must sometimes rely on technical experts in the risk management process, they must also be prepared to make the final judgment themselves. Some guidelines on rating risks are included in Chapter 3 under Risk Qualification. And whereas it is important to examine the quantifiable probabilities for loss, an additional item to consider is opportunity. If no real opportunity exists, then there is no reason to pursue a risky activity. However, as the potential gain increases, so does the threshold for accepting risk. Risk attitudes and appetites. In the past few years, risk attitude and appetite have moved to the fore in many project discussions. Stakeholder risk ratings and evaluations are in many ways based on these two considerations. Risk appetite reflects the environmental willingness to face certain risks, or not face them. Appetite is the degree to which organizations, project teams, and individuals can stomach or tolerate certain types or degrees of risk. While appetite can be a driving force in terms of organizational behavior and overall willingness to take on certain risks, the ultimate determinant is risk attitude. Every individual has risk attitude. Some people would never dream of skydiving. Others embrace it as a thrilling opportunity. No matter the pressures from outside or the appetites of those around them, attitude prevails. Ideally, some alignment between organizational risk appetites and individual risk attitudes should exist. Classifying risk. To the project manager, risks are primarily rooted in the process to deliver a specified product or service at a specified time for a specified cost. A properly planned project will provide the project manager with some reserve funds and slack time to work around unanticipated problems and still meet the original cost, schedule, and performance goals. But a wide variety of problems can keep the manager from meeting project objectives. The product may not attain the performance level specified. The actual costs may be too high, or delivery may be too late. There is, of course, a risk that the original cost, schedule, and performance goals were unattainable, unrealistic, or conflicting. To make it manageable, risk must be classified. The 5th edition of the PMBOK Guide incorporates a risk breakdown structure to draw emphasis toward such classification. PMBOK Guide 2013, page 317. The Software Engineering Institute, in its taxonomy-based risk identification, Carr et al. 1993, also broke down risk into classes and subclasses. Moreover, the original edition of this book, created by the Defense Systems Management College, DSMC, emphasized 5 primary facets of risk. What is important, however, is not to select one particular scheme, but rather to choose approaches that mirror an organization's risk needs. Risk breakdown structure. The 5th edition of the PMBOK Guide, 2013, not only examines the importance of categorizing risk, but also explores the notion that risks are both organization and project-specific, based on the environment and culture. In earlier editions, this risk text examined breaking down risks by facets, characterizing the U.S. Department of Defense environment and culture, and using tools such as the affinity diagram, discussed in Chapter 15, to identify the environment and culture of a specific project. Although the risk breakdown structure is dealt with in much greater depth later, its existence is important to note here, because it reflects a shift in risk management practice from generic categories, as were found in the original PMBOK Guide, to a set of categories that are more germane to a given project. These categories become crucial to effective risk management, as ultimately they reflect the sources of risk on a project or in a project organization. Risk taxonomy. In their groundbreaking, taxonomy-based risk identification, Carr et al. Generated a risk hierarchy for the software development industry that remains peerless. The beauty of their analysis is invaluable. Not only does their discussion list the categories of risk that they identified across myriad...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?